So where do I start? Here's the dilemma. We bought this Grand Banks in 2020, just before the height of COVID. I guess COVID was going on. It was just starting to get crazy. And we bought this boat down in Florida before the prices went insane. And one of the big selling points on the boat was that the tanks were just redone in 2016. So at the time, the tanks were only 4 years old. And any of these old boats, this is a 1986 Grand Banks, uh, 36 Classic. And with any of these old boats, the issue is generally the tanks. What they do when they manufacture the boats, they build the tanks as they are manufacturing them before they put the boat together. So the 400-gallon tanks are built into the boat before they put the rest of the boat on top of it. So in 2016, those tanks were cut out and replaced. But in order for them to get about 400 gallons in again, it's a big job. They have to move the motor, remove the generator, and remove and move everything that's underneath, the plumbing and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's a big job. It's probably at the time $30,000 job. Who knows what it is now? So the tanks were manufactured in Florida and I think in Clearwater, and a yard down there put the tanks in, and that was two owners before us. I believe they had those tanks put in before two owners before us took the boat and did the Great Loop with it. So they had plenty of fuel. New tanks were in there. Then they sold the boat to another couple, which held on to it for a relatively short time. I think they needed something bigger. The boat, as most boats do, they get small very quickly. So we bought the boat from them, and we picked up the boat in Southwest Florida, around the Fort Myers area, and had the boat down there for about a year till I got used to it, learned about it, made sure everything was going to work, and pretty much everything works flawlessly. Some little things here and there, but not a big deal. We ran the boat up, I guess it was August of 2021. We ran it up through the Caloosahatchee, then all the way up the East Coast on the Intercoastal. Honestly, great ride. It took us 10 weeks. I wish we had more time to stop along the way to other places. And it was uneventful. We had no issues whatsoever. Everything worked flawlessly, not an issue. Used the boat most of the summer with the remaining fuel, because last time I put fuel in the boat was actually coin jock, and that was enough fuel to put, I don't know, maybe 150 gallons in, and there was already fuel in the tank. I think the whole trip from Southwest Florida to Long Island, I think I only burned about 600 gallons of fuel. Anyway, the prior year, the next year, when I was going to, I put fuel in the tanks. I think I put 100 gallons in each tank, and came back a couple days later and smelled diesel. I look in the bilge and I see a little bit of diesel. Can't tell where it's really coming from. Checked all the fittings. It wasn't coming from the fittings. So the long and the short of it, it seems like one of the welds on the tanks. So there's actually 4 tanks in this boat. So they took the one big tank out and put in, actually there was 2 big tanks, one on the starboard, one on the port, and then they made 2 smaller tanks so they can get them in there. And they were 100 gallons each roughly. So you got 2 100-gallon tanks on one side, 2 100-gallon tanks on the other side. Well, the outward tanks, one of those was leaking. And over the course of the winter, I made a temporary repair to fix it. When it was leaking, I drained out all the diesel and made the repair. And since I made the repair, that tank, I've had fuel in it once before, but it's pretty much decommissioned, and it will hold fuel without leaking, so it's good. So then, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 months later, another time after filling up, and it always seems to happen after I fill up or put fuel in the tank, another 100 gallons on each side, or maybe it was 50 on each side, doesn't matter. I had a leak on the opposite side, on the outboard tank. Now, the nice thing about 4 tanks is that if you do have a leak, you could always move fuel around and get the fuel out of that one and put it in a tank that's not. But here's the bottom line. So that tank leaked, and then just recently another tank started leaking. So 3 out of the 4 tanks that were put in this boat in 2019 are leaking. And they're not major leaks. They're you know, they're a little leak, but it's enough where you can smell the diesel, and you don't want that. Again, when the first leak happened, I tried to contact the tank manufacturer, and he initially was conversing with me. And then as soon as I mentioned that there might have been a leak, I never heard back from him again. So I'm not going to mention any names, but this tank manufacturer in Florida, I would stay away from, because what's the chances of you got 4 tanks and 3 out of the 4 fail? I've owned boats all my life, never had a fuel tank fail. Before this boat, I had a 1987 Cape Dory, and I'm friends with the person who owns it now. He has no problem with that fuel tank. So clearly, the person who built these tanks didn't do a great job. So, and I don't know if, you know, being down in Florida, then bringing the boat to a colder climate has something to do with it, with the contraction or the heat and the cold, making the welds fail. But bottom line is, 4 tanks, 3 out of the 4 have failed. So what do you do? Because you can't sell a boat with leaky tanks. You're going to take a major hit, because it's probably like $40,000 to maybe do the job over again. And you got 2 ways of doing it. You cut the tanks out, build tanks like the last one, move the engines, and you can get about 400 gallons in it to do what we did before. Or when I thought about it, I said, I'm going to do it myself. I'll cut the tanks out myself, but I'm going to have new tanks fabricated that will be able to fit in and out of the engine room without having to move the engine. You may have to move some plumbing, you may have to do things like that. That's not a big deal. To move the engine, it's a Caterpillar single 3208. It's a big deal to move that engine. You're not moving it. And I don't have the equipment to do it. So my plan is to build 4 new tanks at about 75 gallons each. That would give this boat about 300 gallons of diesel. And safely, if you use 250 of it and I get about 2 miles to the gallon, I still got a 500-mile range. But the big thing is these tanks are going to be serviceable. So if there is an issue, you can actually get the tank out again. And if you had to fix it and re-weld it, not that I ever want that to happen, at least you have that option. So that's where I am now. This is going to be a project that it's not going to be done in one shot. It's probably going to take over a year or 2. I'll do one side, then do the other. So that's my dilemma. Now, a couple questions if you're watching this video, if somebody can help me. So I got 2 tanks on the port side that are leaking. Okay, and what I want to do is drain all the fuel out of that tank and put it into the 1 tank, or the 2 tanks that's not leaking on the starboard side. I know it's going to be, the boat's going to list a little bit, but I could put weight and I could offset it. I could take care of that. My question is, with those tanks there, before I start cutting it open, what should I do? Should I put put some water in the tank with maybe some Dawn with the tanks that are leaking? So if there's any diesel in there, and when the day comes when I start cutting these tanks out, I'm not going to blow the boat up, or if there's another solution. So I'm curious, if somebody has done this before, what do you do with these diesel tanks when they're empty? Because you got fumes and stuff, and I realize that diesel is really not that flammable, but I still don't want to take any chances. So that's where I am now. My first step that I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is disconnect the hoses that go to the filters on the tanks that are leaking. Transfer, using a transfer pump, all the fuel from one side to the other. And then what I have to do is, because the return fuel flow from the engine goes to the tanks that are leaking, so I'm going to have to expand on that hose and send it to the other tank so the return goes into there. Just some plumbing stuff, and it's just grunt work. This isn't rocket science, but this is what I'm going to do. If anybody has any suggestions, let me know. One of the other things I was thinking about, would it be, I was wondering if it would be possible if I put an access panel in one of the tanks, could I get in there and maybe repair the tank from the inside out if I was able to find the leak? Is that worthwhile doing, or just cut them out, put new tanks in, get them fabricated correctly, and go from there? So I'm interested what you have to say. If you have any ideas, please leave them in the comments below. So it was just a matter of finding the right fittings and the right hoses, which I did have already, which was good, made things a little bit easier for me. and just finding the right fittings, making it all work. I got plenty of hose, so that's one thing you definitely need on a boat like this. You need a lot of spare parts, a lot of hoses, a lot of things to rig with, because you never know what you're going to be involved in. So that's it. Now after I do this, I am going to hook up the return of the diesel that was only going to the starboard tank. I'm going to rig it so it goes to the port tank so I can run the boat. So I'll just be running the boat on 100-gallon tank for now until I deal with these tanks on the starboard side. All right, so this is what I rigged up. I took the output, or the bottom part of the sight glass. Okay, it's got a valve there and it comes out of the bottom of the tank. And I ran that through a little filter and running that to the reverso pump, which I am now pumping into the top of the tank, and I'm transferring fuel to the port tank. Well, that's it for today. I am done working on the boat today. I'm transferring fuel. Next thing I got to do is just think about what I'm going to do to balance the boat. And the tanks that are leaking, I just may put some water in there with some Dawn and let that. I don't really care if a little bit of fresh water is leaking into the bilge. I'd rather have that than obviously than diesel. So that's where we are now. So next step is going to be hooking up the return from the engine to the port fuel tank. It was on the starboard. Now it's going to go back to port. And then after that, I got to think about the design of the new tanks and how I'm going to get the old tanks out and cut them out. That's what it's going to be. But I want it to be nice and neat, because the new tanks that I want to put in, I want to make sure that they can go in their place without having to move the engine. So that's the plan. Until next time.